This is the Book Legion Podcast, where we review thought-provoking books to give our Legionnaires the knowledge they need to dominate the next level of their life.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Book Legion. This is your host, Tyser Evans. This week, I'm going to be reviewing the book by Yeonmi Park, While Time Remains. So if you're not familiar with who Yeonmi Park is, I will be covering that again, but I did cover her first book, In Order to Live. I think I did that book review back in August. Who she is, Yeonmi Park, she is a North Korean defector. She escaped the horrors of North Korea when she was 13, moved into China, spent 2 years there pretty much being trafficked, her and her mom, as a sex slave. Traffickers there. Her mom ended up getting actually pimped out to a Chinese farmer, which is a whole nother story. So the first book really goes through that whole horror that she went through as a child in North Korea, growing up eating grasshoppers and dragonflies. Those things were delicacies to her. As her sister escaped through some traffickers into China. So her and her mom basically went after her and her sister. Her dad was in a hard labor camp for doing some black market selling, just trying to feed his family. She eventually got into South Korea, met some missionaries, was able to escape China into South Korea, and eventually wound up in the United States, where today she's a public speaker, author, and human rights activist, as she should be, and has done a lot of good stuff. I found her on the Joe Rogan podcast. She was on there maybe a year and a half ago, and was compelled to read her book, In Order to Live. And I did do a book review on that because it wasn't necessarily business related, but I think that there's a lot of takeaways about how to be grateful for life. So when this book came out, I was really intrigued. Her second book, I honestly did not know what it's about at all. Pleasantly surprised. But this book, forward by Jordan Peterson, really talks about her experience here in America versus how she grew up in North Korea. And there were some things that really started to scare her about the way that the political climate and the way that we're starting to censor language and people online started to remind her a lot of the subversion tactics that were used in North Korea over the last 75 years to be where they're at now, which is probably hell on earth for the 26 million people living there. So in this book, kind of like I did the last one, I'm not going to talk about chapters. I'm going to talk about things I thought that really stood out to me, the things I think that are important, especially as a father of two. I have two kids that are 6 and 8, two young boys. It was important for me to read this, especially what's going on in our public school systems and the university systems and the type of humans that we're putting out to the world and how they have to face the world, and the type of skills that they went to college for does not seemingly look like the type of stuff that I went to college for, and I graduated college in 2007. So, it feels like a long time ago, but in reality, in the scope of things, it wasn't that long ago. So the first thing I did want to just dive into was her experience at Columbia University. So she escapes North Korea, is trafficked for 2 years in China with her mother, eventually escapes through some missionaries into South Korea, the missionaries take her to Tyler, Texas, into Atlanta, Georgia. She realizes all the propaganda that she had learned about the American bastards in North Korea was not true. So, North Korea basically uses the United States as a fear tactic to make everybody think that at any point in time, America is going to come in and just wipe them off the face of the planet. And so there's a big sense of nationalism around hating the United States. So when she got to the United States, she's like, wow, people are relatively friendly, right? This is like great. I can say whatever I want. There's cars, there's plenty of food. The whole reason that she really even escaped to China was two-pronged approach. Was one, her sister left. So she wanted to find her sister who's a couple years older than her. And secondly, she said, all I was looking for was a bowl of rice and bread. This poor girl, her and her sister, delicacies to hers at some point in her life were finding grasshoppers and dragonflies that they roasted to eat. And that was a real big source of protein. And to this day, she says that she's 5'2" and only probably about 85 pounds because she was so malnourished. Long story short, she gets here to America and she never had any type of formal education. So she started that in South Korea and starts reading about human history because they don't teach human history. They don't teach about what's happened. They teach one way of history, which is the way that the Kim dynasty wanted you to learn history. And so, which was pretty much that the whole world is really way worse than it is in North Korea, and that at any point in time we can be taken out by America, as I mentioned. So she gets to Columbia, and she's super excited. It's one of the most prestigious schools, quote unquote, in this country. That's the way I always looked at it, right? And she starts to realize that there's a lot of the things that are being taught and happening in the classrooms are a lot of the same type of subversion tactics that she experienced and that she lived through in North Korea. And so I kind of want to read you some of those things that she experienced as she started to go to school in Colombia. So on page 28, she starts talking about basically that when she got into class that the professors would have to preface that, people could leave if certain type of language offended them or if their feelings got hurt. And she didn't really understand what this meant, that she really thought that the threats they were talking about were like physical threats. Like if something happens, like God forbid there's like an active shooter or something like that, that they could leave class, or if someone was physically threatening them, that obviously they could leave class. She had no idea that they were talking about simply that in today's quote unquote world that, language can be violence. So she said, the threat of the emotional harm was referred to by multiple instructors in order to implicitly explain in so many words why classrooms in Colombia were not allowed the Socratic method. So Socrates, his method is open debate, open discourse. And so this is no longer allowed in a lot of universities around the country. Basically, the narrative is that if you don't agree with the professor and the way that the professor is teaching the class and you're not aligned with liberal progressive ideology, then you're not allowed to speak your mind because it may trigger another student to feel unsafe by your language inside the classroom. So, and then she goes on to state, which I thought was a really great way of putting this, Colombia's code of conduct reminded me of the 7 commandments of George Orwell's Animal Farm. Whoever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs and has wings is a friend. No animal shall wear clothes. No animal shall sleep in a bed. No animal shall drink alcohol. No animal shall kill another animal. All animals are equal, right? And so basically whatever disagrees is silent is an enemy. Whatever agrees is a friend. No student shall speak offensiveness. No student shall touch another student. No student shall make another student feel unsafe. No student shall speak well of America. Only white men are free. And this is kind of a common theme, and I'm not going to talk a lot on that part because I'm a white male, probably with more conservative values. So, I don't want this video get flagged because I'm friends with everybody. But she does make a point that there is a persecution of especially white males in this country, white conservative straight males in this country, along with higher class Asians in this country, right? We're seen as people that are privileged, that have had no struggle, and that we're the oppressors of civilization, that we're the colonizers. And, there's probably truth in that 300 years ago, maybe even 100 years ago. I don't know. That's not my story. That's not the way I've lived life. So that doesn't resonate with me as truth, but she makes it from her point of view. Those are the things that she thought that were being fed to her within the university. She also goes on, I thought, to make a really compelling statement on page 34. Columbia professors seem to be primarily engaged in their own version of autocratic simplification. Feel tired, stressed, a little frightened of the future? It's because the system is rigged against you. It was built by white men in order to subjugate you. Only by destroying that system will you find peace, security, and confidence. And it went on like this for 4 years. So kind of what I was saying, this was her perception of what was being taught in the universities. So it's a no doubt to me that we get out and we see Gen Z have just all kinds of outrage, not ability to communicate because they've been coddled in the university system. They get into the business world, they work more than 25 hours, they start to crumble. They don't perceive capitalism as remotely fair because, I'm a huge believer of equality of opportunity, like Jordan Peterson talks about, but I'm not a believer of equality of outcome, right? Your outcome is based on your input. Your input is what you get out. And so I believe everybody should have the ability to have the same type of opportunity, but it's up to you with what you make of that opportunity. It's not up to someone to, on the back end, make all the outcome of everything equitable, because that's just not realistic. That's not how life works. And every single type of government that has ever done that has fucking failed, and they've failed miserably. So that was basically her experience within the university, that it was racist in its own way, but racist towards one type of race that they just deemed as oppressors, that the kids are coddled. And she said that basically the way that subversion tactics, that the way that the professors viewed America, taught America, was one way. And if you try to speak out or have any type of disagreement, and she was trying to speak from her point of view as a refugee, someone who's been raped, someone who's been trafficked, right? Someone who's been beaten, someone who's been subjugated to starvation, to the most horrific things on the face of the planet. She was censored. She's been censored online. She's been censored by social media. She was censored by her professors and fellow students at Columbia, which I just thought was really wild, that that they would do that to her because she had a fundamental disagreement with what was being said. So really, to me, it takes away and it cripples our kids that are in college, And so some of you may comment not like that. That's totally fine. I don't really care. Just my opinion. And that's not the way I'll raise my kids. I want my kids to be able to deal with somebody else's opinion objectively. If it does not resonate with them as truth, that's fine. But it's still that person's right to express themselves the way they want. And my kids need to respect that and value that person's opinion and see if there's anything they can learn from it. And if they can't, they don't resonate with truth, then you just move on. Not everybody has to be friends. That's okay. The other thing that, she talked about a lot was cancel culture and how dangerous this is, right? Because there has been obviously attack on the First Amendment. Republicans are like, I don't do the D's and R's thing, but Republicans were saying, hey, we're being censored on social media. And the left was like, no, it's crazy. You guys are conspiracy theorists. Now Twitter Files comes out. They 100% were censoring the right, predominantly more than the left by a vast majority. I mean, the fact that the United States president was taken off Twitter, but the Taliban and ISIS can have Twitter accounts shows you how much their censorship was really happening to one political party that was quote unquote inciting violence. The other thing that she talks about to kind of sum up, some of the points, I guess I should read a quote on page 86 that, I thought that was relevant that I wrote down when it came to her explaining more of the school system and what she sees as America is talking about when it comes to racism in the society. But if anti-racism and CTR are correct about contemporary America, the United States in 2023, how do we explain the fact that the supporters and propagators of these ideologies have chosen to stay here? That there isn't a mass exodus of Americans with oppressed blood to foreign countries, and that the champions of these ideologies tend to be disproportionately represented in the media, university, NGOs, other elite, and high-paying institutions. And she makes a really good point, and she also makes a really good point that, if you're so unhappy, why don't you leave? And you hear this rhetoric all the time from the left that, if Trump or somebody else gets, elected, we're moving to Canada. And they never fucking moved to Canada, right? And maybe the right does it too, and they should be thought of the same way. If you say that, then you should go do it. But what she does talk about, this oppressed blood, like I just look at it like, unfortunately, slavery and oppression has happened in every corner of the world for the entire human existence. And that does not mean that we ignore it. And that does not mean that we don't fix, I said, equality of opportunity in this company. Because I've seen it. I've seen that, would not deny that there's not racist people in this country. There most certainly is. But we oftentimes get really siloed with who's experienced that. We often don't talk about the Asian Americans that were put in concentration camps in this country during World War II. Their businesses and their homes were taken from them, and they were never given back. And so she talks about that here. But what do you see Asian Americans doing today? They're thriving on all accounts. If you look at test scores, businesses opened, probably medium income of wealth, they are at the top of the food chain in this country. It's because they've taken the liberty to not let anything hold them down. No excuse can hold them down. And they've disciplined themselves in their studies, and they've excelled with taking advantage of all the opportunities that America has to offer. And, by all accounts, her take on America is the greatest country on earth. And the whole reason that she wrote this book is that you can't start to protect or censor freedom of certain people. And she gives a great example of certain times that, like the ACLU protected the freedom of speech, which is a super left-leaning organization, and they protected the rights of the KKK to go march, I think in downtown Chicago or Detroit in the 1960s. Now, I think that's fucking disgusting that the KKK would even do that or want to do that, right? But if you believe in the First Amendment, you believe it on all accounts. And that is her point, that, the freedoms were put into place for all people because all people are created equal. So you can't pick and choose when it's convenient for you to say that you have freedom of speech and when you don't. So, she made so many good points in this book, but the whole point of the book is really just to focus on, we build a beautiful country that is imperfect. And although it is imperfect, it's still the best system that the planet has ever seen, at least that we know about in recorded history. You can debate maybe Atlantis and some other things that may have happened if you get into the Tartaria mud flood stuff. Maybe there was different civilizations before certain resets happened and certain ways of living that were better. But if you look around at all the governments, socialism, Marxism, right, fascism, imperialism versus capitalist, America is a place where everybody wants to come because it's fucking free. And the people here don't value the things that have been inherently given to them as a birthright. So it takes an outsider coming from North Korea who didn't have a word for love. They didn't have a word for oppression. They didn't have a word for slavery. They don't even understand what those concepts are, nor could they verbally express them because they removed those words from their language, which they did on purpose, so they couldn't even verbalize how they're feeling. They just knew that what they were going through was wrong, which is why they escaped to China, right? So, she just makes the point that we don't even really understand how inherently lucky we are to even just be able to express, and I'll read you the one of the last pages here, this, because I thought it kind of really brought the whole book home for me. And it's a couple, I guess I want to touch on one other thing. The other point that she makes too is the relationship that we have with China. That she went to all these type of global elite events where she spoke. She met Hillary Clinton. She's met Nancy Pelosi. She's spoken at world conferences on the horrors that she faced in North Korea. But because of North Korea, it does 2/3 of their exports to China. China does all of North Korea's imports, right? China gives North Korea, I think it's $4 billion out of their $26 billion GDP in foreign aid. So the only reason that North Korea exists is because of China. It's a strategical place for them to have a huge military, and North Korea has the 4th largest military in the world. They have 1.7 million active people in the North Korean army. And then they have like 7 million in reserves because everybody has to serve. All males have to serve 10 years and all women have to serve 7 years. So it's a very strategical place to fend off some certain regions that have ties with the United States. But China also is one of the big financiers in the United States when it comes to business, real estate, right? Investments, Hollywood. And so, a lot of her videos are censored on YouTube. This might be censored because of Google's relationship with China, which it wouldn't surprise me. And so she says that, there's 26 million people starving to death in North Korea. The fact that North Korea has a seat at the UN and has the same voting power as the United States is a fucking joke. And she goes to make the point that we could do something about it, but the people in charge are so embedded financially with China, the elites that run the global economic structure, that they don't touch North Korea. She went to people that she thought were in power to make them aware of the atrocities and the things that she went through as a rape victim, as a human trafficking survivor, as someone who was almost starved to death, someone that had to watch public executions as a kid. When pregnant mothers would come back over from China, if they were sent back, something the Chinese always threatened was to send them back. They send them back. They put boards on the mother's stomachs and jump to kill the baby because they want to keep the bloodline pure. What does that remind you of? Nazi Germany. So all these things that she went through, she went to the right people and they basically fucking did nothing because of their economical ties with China. But to wrap up the book, she's basically saying that America, we can get through this tough time, but we have to make sure that we double down and protect the freedoms of this country. We have to protect the First Amendment. We have to protect the freedoms that are inherently stowed. And because so many of us were born here, that we don't understand the true freedoms and how many people across the world want to get here to experience these freedoms because they don't have them where they're from. And so I'll read you the last two paragraphs and we'll end the video. In America, however, people rallying against their own country are overfed or obsessed with intentionally limiting the amount of food that they eat. Often, they will speak out against the American history, society, capitalism, and the democracy on America's social media platform from their American phone or computer, or on a campus of a world-class American university, or on the street with permission of the American authorities and the protection of the American police officers. North Koreans say such things because if they don't, they'll be shot. Americans do because they think it's fun or because they want to acquire power and influence over other people. And that says it all, right? You can't say this shit in North Korea because you'll be fucking executed in public. We can say it because we're protected by freedoms, right? But the same people that are protected by the freedoms are trying to end the freedoms that would end their freedoms to say the things that they got them, the freedoms that they think that they want, right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Then she goes on to say, it's no wonder really that while millions of people around the world continue to face murder, starvation, rape, torture, enslavement, many Americans who support social justice are primarily concerned with the infinite multiplication and ungrammatical gender pronouns and how much range to give chickens before they wind up in supermarkets. It's easy to laugh at this kind of childish, nonsensical behavior. And even I enjoy poking fun at it now and again. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, it's deadly serious. When a people become untethered from history, when they become unshackled from reality, they lose the ability to understand cause and effect, and they become ripe for exploitation from those who hold real power. And I think that kind of sums up the book. So if you're someone who's pro-America, you're pro-freedom, whether you're right or left, you have to acknowledge that we have real issues and we have real division in this country. And at the end of the day, we all have to come together to get along, because what matters, what we do today, matters for our kids in the future. I'm deeply concerned about the offshoring of jobs, about the political narrative that's being taught to children, the over-sexualization of children in today's society. So I think it's an important read. It's important to look at both sides of every issue, especially when you don't agree with the other side. You have to understand where they're coming from in order to find the middle ground. And in order to be able to find middle ground and have civil discourse, you got to look at both sides of the issue, and you have to protect the freedoms that allow you to engage in civil discourse. And that's finally being rotted at the core of our society right now, my personal belief. So anyway, if you're intrigued by the book and you want to read her book, she does go into a lot of her story of how she escaped North Korea. I'll also post a link to the book, to this one, of course, but also to other book, In Order to Live, in there as well. Again, feel free to agree, disagree. It doesn't really matter to me. It was just my take on the book review. I think it's something that you need to understand, the atrocities that happened in all other corners of the world that still happen in 2023. People are being trafficked. Trafficking is a $100 billion industry, and the United States is the largest consumer of people that are being trafficked. It's a real problem. People are still starving to death. People are just going through things that here we can't even possibly imagine. So her perspective on our country is meaningful and it's insightful, and I encourage you to be open-minded enough to read the book. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. We put out a book review once every week. I'll be chatting. My next book will be on Wim Hof's book, The Wim Hof Method. Thanks so much.